In the lawyer's office, my brother leaned back in his chair, looked directly at me across the table and said, "Don't pretend you're grieving. You're just here for the money." My hands froze in my lap. Then someone knocked on the office door, and a stranger stepped inside holding a sealed envelope. "My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 38 years old. 2 years ago I lost my husband. I won't spend much time on that part of the story because grief is not something I know how to summarize in a few sentences, and because it isn't really the point. The point is what came after. The rebuilding. The learning to carry weight you never expected to carry alone, in a life that was designed for 2 people and suddenly had to function with 1. I work as a medical receptionist at a clinic on the north side of town. The hours are steady, the pay is modest, and the work requires a specific kind of patience, the kind that comes from spending your days with people who are scared or hurting or waiting for news they don't want to receive. I am good at that kind of patience. I have had a lot of practice. My father's name was Robert Mitchell. He was a quiet man who expressed love through action rather than words, through showing up, through fixing things, through sitting beside you without needing to fill the silence. When his health began to decline last year, I drove to his house twice a week. I managed his medications, attended his appointments, learned the names of his doctors and the specific terminology of his condition so that I could ask the right questions on his behalf. I cooked meals and left them in his refrigerator labeled by day. I called him every evening, even when the conversations were short and he was tired. I did these things because he was my father. That was the entirety of my reasoning. My brother is named Corey. He is 2 years older than me and has operated, for as long as I can remember, with the easy confidence of someone who has been told consistently that he is the capable one, the dependable one, the one the family trusts to handle important matters. Whether or not that confidence was ever genuinely earned is a question I spent years avoiding. I think by now I have my answer. During our father's illness, Corey visited twice. I counted because I was there often enough to notice his absence. He called occasionally, not to ask about medications or appointments or how our father was actually managing, but to ask general questions that allowed him to feel informed without requiring him to do anything with the information. When our father passed, Corey flew in for the funeral and immediately began moving through the family with the authority of someone who had been present for everything, speaking about decisions and arrangements as though he had been at the center of all of them. I said nothing, because I was grieving, and because I had learned a long time ago that correcting Corey in front of an audience produced nothing useful. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I had no legal connections, no financial leverage, no advantages that anyone looking at the 2 of us from the outside would have identified as significant. But I had something Corey had never once thought to look for in me. My father had thought carefully about what he left behind. If you have ever lost someone and found yourself in the middle of your grief, having to defend the nature of that grief to people who should have simply believed you, if you have ever been accused of selfishness by someone who showed up only when there was something to gain, then you already understand the particular exhaustion of walking into that lawyer's office. It is not a loud kind of pain. It is the quiet, disorienting pain of being seen incorrectly by someone who should know you better than almost anyone, and of understanding that they have chosen their version of you because it serves them. If that is part of your story, I want you to know you are not alone in it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share your experience in the comments, I read every one. And if this story reaches you, click hype before we continue. The lawyer's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, the kind of office that smelled faintly of old paper and carpet that had been cleaned too many times. 4 chairs arranged around a rectangular table. A window that looked out onto the street below. The sound of traffic moving through it like distant water. I arrived a few minutes early and sat in the chair closest to the door. Not a strategic choice, I simply didn't want to be the last one in the room. Corey arrived with 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. He walked in the way he always walked into rooms he had already decided belonged to him, ahead of everyone, moving directly to the seat at the head of the table, setting his jacket on the back of the chair with the ease of a man who had already run through this meeting in his head and knew exactly how it would go. He looked at me when he sat down. Not a greeting. An assessment. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Farrell who had handled the estate paperwork, was still organizing documents on his side of the table. The cousins settled into their seats. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when everyone is waiting for something to begin. Corey did not wait. He looked around the table and said in a tone that was almost conversational, Let's not waste time pretending we're all equal here. I looked at him, said nothing. He continued. He suggested to the room that Lauren's recent closeness with their father had been strategic, that her consistent presence during the illness had been less about care and more about positioning. He said it casually, the way people say things they have been rehearsing privately for weeks, smoothly, without apparent effort. I was there because he needed someone, I said. Corey smiled. Not warmly. You're a greedy widow looking for your next safety net, he said. Clearly. In a room with 4 other people in it. The cousins looked at the table. Mr. Farrell adjusted the papers in front of him without speaking. The sound of the traffic outside continued. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I looked at my brother for a moment and then looked away, because some responses are not worth the energy they would cost, and because I had arrived at that office understanding that whatever happened in the next hour would not be changed by my reaction to him. Corey kept talking. He suggested I would take whatever I could get. He positioned himself to the room as the responsible child, the one who had understood their father in ways I never had, the one whose judgment should be trusted when it came to what their father would have wanted. Mr. Farrell opened his folder. And then someone knocked on the door. The knock was firm. 2 sounds, clean and deliberate. Mr. Farrell looked up. Come in. The door opened. A man I did not recognize stepped inside. He was somewhere in his 60s, neatly dressed, carrying a sealed manila envelope held flat in both hands with the careful posture of someone transporting something they have been instructed not to damage. He looked at the nameplate on the desk. Is this the office handling Mr. Robert Mitchell's estate? Mr. Farrell said yes. The man nodded once. I was asked to deliver this in person. I was instructed it should be received before the reading began. Corey turned in his chair. Whatever that is, it can wait. We were about to start. The man looked at Corey briefly. Then he looked back at Mr. Farrell and held out the envelope. Mr. Farrell accepted it. Corey was not finished. While Mr. Farrell set the envelope to one side and continued preparing the original documents, Corey resumed his performance. He told the room that he had been the one managing all the important decisions regarding their father's care. He described conversations he'd had with doctors, conversations I had been present for, and that he had not attended. He spoke about his father's wishes with the authority of someone recounting first-hand experience, and he did it fluently, without hesitation, in the confident tone of a man who had told a story often enough that he no longer distinguished it from memory. I noticed the cousins listening. I noticed the way their expressions shifted slightly as Corey spoke, not entirely convinced, but uncertain enough to stay quiet. That is the particular skill Corey had always possessed. Not the ability to prove things, but the ability to make uncertainty work in his favor. To speak with enough confidence that the room defaulted to his version simply because his version was delivered without visible doubt. He then turned his attention to the assets. He told Mr. Farrell, in the tone of a man clarifying something obvious, that certain properties should naturally be allocated to him because he was better positioned to manage them. He mentioned the family home, a savings account he referenced by approximate value, and a piece of land outside of town that our father had owned for 30 years. He did not ask. He informed. The stranger who had delivered the envelope was still standing near the door. Corey had not looked at him once since dismissing him. He was a background detail already categorized and moved past. I watched Corey talk and felt something settle further into place inside me. Not anger. Not bitterness. Something quieter. The particular calm that arrives when you realize you have prepared for exactly this, and you no longer need to do anything except wait. In the final months of my father's life, something shifted in him. It was not dramatic. He was not a dramatic man. But I noticed in the last several weeks before he was admitted to the hospital for the final time, that he had grown preoccupied in a specific way. He asked me questions about legal documents, not about his will directly but about the process. Whether changes could be made. Whether documents signed close to the end were treated differently. Whether it was possible to leave written explanations alongside a legal decision, or whether the law only recognized the decision itself. I answered what I could. I told him to speak with a lawyer if he had specific concerns. He nodded, in the way he nodded when he had already decided something and was simply gathering the last pieces of information he needed. One evening, maybe 3 weeks before he died, he said something to me that I held on to without fully understanding at the time. Some things need to be written clearly, he said, so no one can twist them. I asked him what he meant. He patted my hand. I'm taking care of it. I didn't press him. I trusted him. I had always trusted him. What I didn't know then was that he had reached out, quietly and independently, to the lawyer who had handled his affairs years before the current attorney. A man named Henry Oakes who had known our father since before Corey and I were born. My father had asked Henry to help him revise his will and draft a letter to accompany it. He had asked Henry to arrange for the revised documents to be delivered to the estate lawyer's office in person, before the reading, by someone the family would not recognize. He had arranged all of this without telling me, because he didn't want me to carry it, because he understood that the burden of knowing, and the pressure that knowledge would create in the months leading up to this day, was not something he wanted to put on me. He was, to the end, thinking about how to protect the people he loved from unnecessary weight. When I saw the sealed envelope in the stranger's hands, something in me recognized it before I could have explained why. A feeling that arrived in the chest before the mind could process it. My father had taken care of it. The stranger introduced himself briefly to Mr. Farrell. He gave his name and said he had been sent by Henry Oakes on behalf of the Mitchell estate. He explained that Mr. Oakes had been instructed to ensure the envelope was delivered before the official reading began. Then he stepped back toward the door and waited. Corey leaned forward. Who is Henry Oakes? Dad's first lawyer, I said. Corey looked at me. Then at the envelope. Whatever's in there, the original will should stand, he said. That's what we came here for. Mr. Farrell picked up the envelope and looked at it carefully. I'm obligated to review any documents submitted as part of an estate before proceeding. That's standard practice. He said it without looking up.
Corey sat back. The confidence was still present, but something underneath it had become less certain. A slight change in the angle of his shoulders. A barely visible recalibration. The room was quiet except for the sound of the envelope being opened, the clean, careful tear of the seal, and then the sound of papers being unfolded and laid flat on the desk. Mr. Farrell read. No one spoke. The traffic outside moved. The clock on the wall behind Mr. Farrell marked the seconds with a sound that, in that silence, felt much louder than it should have. I watched Mr. Farrell's expression change as he read. Not dramatically, just the slight, controlled shift of a professional encountering something that requires him to adjust his understanding of the situation. He set the papers down, looked up, cleared his throat. The documents in this envelope, Mr. Farrell said, constitute a revised will, properly signed and witnessed, along with a formal letter from Mr. Robert Mitchell addressed to his family. Corey's chair scraped the floor as he shifted. The original will should take precedence. A properly executed revision takes legal precedence over the prior document, Mr. Farrell said, still calm. This revision was signed, witnessed, and notarized. It is legally binding. He began reading. The revised will described a different distribution of assets than the original. The family home was to be held in a trust with Lauren designated as the managing trustee, responsible for all decisions regarding its use and eventual sale. The savings account was divided, with a larger portion allocated to Lauren than to Corey. The land outside town was left to Lauren outright, with a note in the margin that she would understand why. Corey's jaw tightened. I could hear it from where I was sitting. Not literally, but I had known him long enough to read the set of his face. Then Mr. Farrell set down the will and picked up the letter. My father had written it by hand. Mr. Farrell read it in full. The letter described, in my father's plain and careful language, the last year of his life. It described the twice-weekly visits, the medications managed and the appointments attended, the meals left in the refrigerator, the phone calls every evening. It described specific moments, a Tuesday afternoon when he had been frightened about a test result and I had sat beside him in the clinic waiting room for 3 hours without being asked to stay. A conversation in October where he had told me he was tired and I had listened without trying to fix the tiredness. A night in November when he had called at 2 a.m. and I had answered on the second ring. He wrote about Corey too, directly and without cruelty, but without softening what was true. He wrote that he had hoped, for a long time, that his son would find his way to showing up. He wrote that hope had diminished over the course of a year. He wrote that he was disappointed, and that he wanted Corey to read those words and sit with them, not as a punishment, but as the honest record of a father who had loved him and wanted more from him than he had chosen to give. The room was completely silent by the time Mr. Farrell finished. Corey was looking at the table. I was looking at my hands. Mr. Farrell set the letter down carefully. The revised will is the controlling document. We will proceed accordingly. I looked at my brother. He did not look up. I said, quietly and without heat, I didn't come here for money, but I'm not going to apologize for being there when he needed me. Corey said nothing. No one said anything. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Corey left quickly. He said nothing to me on the way out, not a word, not a look. The cousins followed him, with the uncertain, slightly deflated energy of people who had arrived expecting to witness one outcome and were now adjusting to a different reality. The stranger who had delivered the envelope shook Mr. Farrell's hand, nodded to me once, and left. I sat in the office for a few minutes after everyone else had gone. Mr. Farrell gave me copies of all the documents and told me his office would be in touch about next steps. I thanked him. He said, with a quiet sincerity that surprised me, that he was sorry for my loss. I walked down the stairs and out onto the street. The air outside was cool and direct, and the afternoon had the particular quality of late autumn light, flat and honest, with nothing soft about it. I stood on the pavement and breathed for a moment. I did not feel like I had won something. I felt, for the first time in months, like my father had seen me. Not in the past tense, not as a memory, but in that office, through those words, in the letter he had taken the time and care to write when he was tired and ill and still thinking about the people he was going to leave behind. He had seen me. He had written it down. He had made sure it could not be twisted. The inheritance mattered, less than I could have predicted. Not nothing. I won't pretend the financial reality of my life made the practical portion irrelevant. It was real, and it was a relief, and I was grateful. But what I took home with me from that office was the letter. The specific, handwritten evidence that my presence had been registered and valued by the person who had mattered most. Corey called me 3 weeks later. The conversation was short and uncomfortable, and he did not apologize directly, but he said things that circled around an apology, acknowledgments that were partial but more than I had expected. I listened without interrupting. I did not make it easy for him, but I did not close the door either. Because he was still my brother, and because I understood that the letter my father had left was addressed to Corey too, and that some part of him was going to have to live with it for a long time. My father had said some things need to be written clearly so no one can twist them. He had been right about that. He had known exactly what he was doing, and he had done it with the same quiet thoroughness he had brought to everything else in his life, without needing to be praised for it, without needing anyone to know, just getting it done and trusting that the moment would come when it mattered. He called me greedy, but what I had actually been for the entire year before my father died was present. Those are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. And now there was a letter, written in my father's own hand, that made sure everyone in that room understood the difference. If you have ever been judged unfairly during a time of grief, if you have sat in a room and listened to someone rewrite the story of what you gave, and felt the particular powerlessness of knowing the truth and watching it get buried under someone else's confidence, you are not alone in that experience. Grief is hard enough without having to defend it. Loss is hard enough without having to prove that your love was real. If you have been in that room, share your story in the comments below. Other people need to read it tonight. They're sitting somewhere right now in their own version of that grief, wondering if what they gave was enough, wondering if anyone noticed. It was enough. Someone noticed. Subscribe if you haven't already. Click hype to help this story reach the person who needs to hear it. And if you've been in a situation where standing up for yourself felt impossible, where the truth existed but seemed like no one would ever acknowledge it, let me know in the comments. You became part of this community the moment this story felt familiar. I'm reading. I'm here.